whatever. But the whole purpose is to learn how to love, how to create our inner being that is a person of love. And why is that so important? Why is that more important than, let's say, finding happiness through a lot of material wealth? Well, because as I've already said, we do not stay in this world. We move on to another world, a spiritual world. Now, that might be something new for you. Maybe you already have awareness of it. Maybe you have experiences, personal experiences of the spirit world. I'm sorry, the pictures are not great. This is actually a photograph of a painting that was made at the beginning of the 20th century by a man who had many experiences of the spirit world, and he painted what he saw. So although, it looks like, well, it looks whatever it looks, but it's not an ideal picture of what it really is like in the spirit world. But my point is that we leave this life and we go off into the spiritual world. Now, I had personal experience of my spirit leaving my body. I know what it feels like. I know that death itself is not painful. Maybe the process leading up to it, sicknesses or whatever, an accident, might be painful. But the actual experience of dying is not painful. It's simply the spirit leaving the body, or the soul leaving the body, whichever word you want to use for it. It doesn't really matter. What is important is that we have an inner being that is destined to move into the spiritual world, and that is our eternal world. Now, if in this life, let's say if in the womb we breathe water, we live in an environment of water. In this world, we live in an environment of air. We breathe air. But in the spiritual world, you don't need water. It's not an environment of water. It's not an environment of air. It's an environment of love. And where we go in the spirit world is not determined by God, who is sitting on his throne saying, you've been good, you can go there. You haven't been so good, you go there. You've been really bad down there. It isn't like that. The spirit world is as real or more real than this, because actually in the material world there's more space than there is matter. If you look at the atoms and you see the distance between the center of the atom and the outside, there's a huge distance, relatively speaking. But in the spirit world, spirit is substantial. So what is important for us then is that we understand that this life is learning how to love, because the extent of our heart, the ability to love, is the determination of the extent of our freedom in the spirit world. A moment ago I said God doesn't send the good people to heaven and the bad people to hell. It's already determined by ourselves. We know this in this life. If you do something really bad, or maybe something that's a little bit out of character, you feel guilty, you feel uncomfortable. And if you've done something quite bad, and then you meet with people that you meet every day, you feel uncomfortable because somehow you feel out of sorts. So in the spiritual world, where we go is determined by our spiritual development. So if we've led a good life, we have a lot of freedom, we can meet people freely, we are not judged in any way. Feeling guilty is like a feeling of judgment. I've done something or said something that I shouldn't have, and it's against the normal standard by which I live. And therefore you feel bad. So when you feel bad, you can go to somebody and you can say, I'm so sorry. Or maybe not, you kind of run away and hide. But in the spirit world, you cannot hide. Our whole life is replayed like a video machine. It's all there, and we come face to face to it, and we have to restore the things we've done wrong. Okay, now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, because that isn't my point. My point is that we live in a world where there are all sorts of good and bad and so on. We want to understand, is there an origin to the evil? How did it come about, and so on? So, many things created. For example, the industry. In general, we can say the industry that exists is created to produce something good. In the early days when we created power stations, we were not aware of the damage that was caused. People smoked. You go back a few hundred years when smoking began, it was introduced in this country, and people smoked. They had no idea of the damage they were doing to their bodies. But now, many years later, with scientific advances, we can see there's a huge risk of damage. But, okay, that's just one example. Our water. We have water companies that purify the water so that we can turn on a tap and drink water anytime we like, and it should be clean and fresh. But there's a consequence to that. In order for them to clean the water, they have to take out the impurities. So they try to process the impurities, recycle it if you like. But the downside is sometimes they have more of the rubbish, if you like, than they can handle. For example, when there are exceptional periods of bad weather, a lot of storms, rains and so on, what do? They discharge what they can't handle back into the rivers and to the sea. What does that mean? Well, it means we are polluting the oceans, we're polluting the rivers. Sometimes we see rivers where fish have died because of the pollution. Sometimes you can be swimming in a river or in the sea and you come face to face with the pollution, somebody's feces or something. It's disgusting. They shouldn't do that. But that's a consequence of the fact that they have too much rubbish that they can't handle, so they just dump it into the ocean, into the rivers, and that's a consequence. So although on one hand we can have nice drinking water, the other side of it is that there is sewage. Then there's the question of money. We generally think, let's say within the Christian world, the understanding is Jesus was poor. And many Christians think, yeah, that's how we should live our lives. But actually, if you think about God creating this whole cosmos, God wants nobody to be poor. God didn't intend people like Jesus and Buddha and whatever to be poor. But there was something that has gone wrong in the whole cycle of life. So money itself should actually be able to buy us comfort, and it can. We earn enough money to buy a television. Most of us, maybe all of us, watch TV on Netflix or Prime Video or whatever, and we can't do it without money. So in a way, we work hard and we get well paid, or we get paid. I don't know if we get well paid. Some people do, some people not so much. The point still remains is that we have an opportunity to earn money to have a comfortable existence. But in the same way that when we have good water from the water companies, there's pollution, the bad side of that is if people just accumulate wealth for their purpose. Sometimes you see these programs where the super rich, let me put it that way, and I don't want to judge whether they're good or bad people, but the super rich live in a world that I have to say for me would be very difficult to relate to. That's probably because I'm not super rich. Simple answer to that. But I'm not used to that environment. That's what I'm saying. It's an environment that's alien to me. And not only that, quite honestly, and I think you all would feel the same, you wouldn't be here if you weren't conscientious people. You need a certain amount of wealth to live your lives, take care of your families, and do what you need to do. But if you had too much wealth, and you were buying yourself expensive Ferraris and things like that, some of the rich footballers, they buy these incredibly expensive cars costing millions of pounds. And yet some of them collect the cars. But isn't it ironic, in a place like California, this picture is actually from California, where super rich people live, but in California they have a huge number of people living in tents on the streets. Isn't there some, what is the word to use for that? It's a contradiction there, isn't there? There's a contrast which doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. Now, you're not going to go down here and just immediately think, oh, those rich people up there, the other side of town, they should be giving more money. Actually, if the rich people just gave their money away to the poor people, probably what we'd have in no time is we'd all be poor. rich people, that's fine. They are blessed with the ability to make money. But can you imagine, if they understand the purpose of life is to learn how to love, can you imagine the more wealth you have, the more you're able to live comfortably, but also to help other people? Right? Now, again, as I said, I'm not going to judge them or anybody. People have to answer for themselves. But I'm simply pointing out that, it's an irony that, we can make lots of money and yet at the same time there are people living on the streets. Even in Cardiff, people are living in the shop doorways and things like that. And of course, you go to extremes and then you have people living in dire poverty, where they are scrounging and living, looking through the rubbish that they live amongst in order to survive. So what exists for our good is often misused, resulting in misery and suffering. So what went wrong then? What is the origin of evil? Well, from a certain viewpoint, we think of God as being a God of love, God of goodness. Not just God of love and goodness, but absolute love, absolute goodness. And so, if God is absolutely good, how is there evil? And when there are things going wrong, I don't know if you've heard it yourself, but many times I've heard people say, well, if there is a God of love, where is he? What is he doing? I can't believe in God when I see all this misery, when God is so powerful and so loving. It doesn't make sense. On the other hand, it does make sense when we understand more about this. So what is the origin of evil? Well, let's look on a little bit and think, from God's point of view, God is love. God wants peace and harmony. Now, I use the word God in a general sense. Father Moon, who taught us these things, said it doesn't really matter which name you give to God. For example, Hindus will use maybe the word Brahman, or perhaps other names. Muslims will use the word Allah, Jews, Jehovah. What we are talking about is that being of absolute love, absolute goodness, and truth. So the name is less important than knowing that this being, this absolute cosmic intelligence, I think many scientists use the word now, cosmic intelligence, or anyway, some fancy name about an intelligent being. So God creates all things, creates all of this, creates us, and we have this desire for a good heart, to see goodness in people, and to have a good mind. In other words, to be people who are loving, caring, and selfish. And I see your lives. I know how Kalpana is involved in helping other people. You don't help people because you don't care for them. You help them because you care for them. It's from your heart. My friend Munuamu became a pastor, a minister. Why? Because of the goodness of heart. You have a desire to do good things. We don't become ministers of religion if we want to do bad things. We may not have all the answers, so a good mind, a good heart is a person really who lives more for the sake of others, is willing to sacrifice himself. When you go to church on Sunday, or to the synagogue, or to the mosque, the imam, the priest, whatever, he is giving up his time to teach people what he understands. That is sacrificing oneself. Of course, there's many levels of sacrifice. But you see, our heart is not a simple, straightforward heart that is capable of loving unconditionally. Sometimes we have that little bit of a desire to love ourselves more, selfishly. And this is coming from some evil force. In religion, we might use the word Satan. I think Muslims will use the word shaitan, is it? Anyway, whatever name we give, the point is it's an adversary, the devil, it's something that is against the spirit of goodness. And we see this in the self-centered, evil heart and mind that many people have. The selfish desires. In other words, the desire to sacrifice others for my benefit. It's the opposite of people who are willing to sacrifice themselves for the sake of others. Religious leaders, like the great people like Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, they were people that lived for the sake of others. They sacrificed their lives. Jesus was killed on a cross, murdered. Why? Only because he wanted to love people and show people how to love one another. And yet, the evil people of the day sacrificed Jesus for their benefit. They didn't like his message because it disturbed their lives, disturbed their consciences. So easier to get rid of something that you don't like than to change. That's the problem there. The problem there ultimately is that we are left in this state of contradiction, struggle, ultimately destruction. This is the fate of human beings. We are in the process of destroying ourselves, climate change, climate crisis, and all this business that's in the news. It's all because we just do not have the right heart and we don't understand the right way of living. So, St. Paul expressed this very well in the Bible when he said, I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil that I don't want to do, this I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it's no longer I who is doing it. Do you see what I'm saying here? If I do things that I don't want to do, then why am I doing it? Is it because actually I'm secretly evil and I like doing things I don't want to do? Or is it because I'm being influenced by some force that I don't understand? This is the reality. We are actually being influenced by something that we don't understand